Coming again! Coming again!
Big one.
Bigger! Oh my God!
Get inside, come on guys. Okay, I'm getting frightened now.
The terrifying sight and sound of nature's fury, the giant tsunami. Good evening. It was the day that death came from the sea. Tonight, the full horrific scale of the disaster is unfolding. Over 25,000 are dead, and hour by hour, that death toll rises. 13 are British. We now know the wave was triggered by the world's strongest earthquake in 40 years, 9 on the Richter scale. Tonight, in this special programme, our correspondents have eyewitness reports from across the devastated region. Coastal villages, paradise islands and tropical beaches turned into hell on earth. The full force will report live from Sri Lanka, where over 12,000 were swept away when the wave tore through entire villages and towns. The terrible toll, 7,000 dead in India, over 5,000 in Indonesia. Is this the most deadly natural disaster in recent history? Holiday tragedies, 10 British tourists lost their lives in Thailand. Thousands are sleeping rough tonight. We'll have the very latest live from the Thai resort of Phuket and survivors' stories from the remote Maldive Islands.
We climbed up this tree while the water was still breaking right at our feet, the waves. We hid up the tree and went higher and higher until we were right at the top.
And they saw it coming. We reveal the shocking truth that experts knew the wave was on the way, but were powerless to warn or save the thousands who were killed. The country with the highest death toll so far is Sri Lanka, hit on both east and west coasts. Entire communities have been wiped out. The official death toll stands at 12,000, but it's feared it could go as high as 20,000. It's from the air that the scale of this disaster is most apparent. The wave washed away everything in its path. Houses were thrown like matchsticks, trains tossed like toys. People, thousands of them, were washed out to sea. Exactly how many may never be known. Well, our correspondent Harry Smith has spent the day travelling through the island. Understandably, communications are poor, and he joins us live now via video phone. Harry.
Mark, as you said, communications here are extremely difficult. In some cases, that's simply because roads have disappeared. In other cases, it's because the army and the police are restricting access to roads in order to help the massive rescue operation that's now going on. Well, we managed to get on one road earlier today. It took us to one fishing village where we spoke to the residents there about how they were affected by this disaster.
As we drove south from the capital, Colombo, it wasn't long before we saw the scale of the damage the sea has inflicted on this island nation. Amid torrential rain, they surveyed the damage and began to pick up the pieces.
And this is just one small stretch of the Sri Lankan coastline which was hit. And to make matters worse for those who are now homeless, they're being drenched by a tropical storm.
This man told me there wasn't one member of his family who still had a roof over their heads.
One house and my brother and my sister house and everything. 4 houses are same land. Every all houses are actually then destroyed. Everything.
Some have already brought in earth movers to start the clear up. Others have only their hands to pick at the rubble.
This is the fishing village of Payagala, where boats like this are normally left moored down on the beach. This one ended up more than 300 yards from the water's edge, tossed by the force of the waves, left high and dry here in the village churchyard.
Cars were also picked up and tossed aside. One man told me he found his 400 yards from his wrecked garage. It will be many months before trains once again run into the village station. The authorities have managed to clear most of the roads of debris. Much-needed supplies, such as fresh water, are getting through here. But this is a relatively prosperous and heavily populated part of Sri Lanka. In other areas, they haven't even begun to count the cost. Harry Smith.
And I hope Harry can join us now on his video phone. Harry, is Sri Lanka able to cope with a disaster on this scale?
Frankly, Mark, no, this country can't cope with a disaster like this, and the government has admitted as much. It said it's not equipped to deal with something on this magnitude simply because it's never known anything on this magnitude. Now, it's difficult to know how many countries could cope, no matter how large, no matter how rich. Sri Lanka is doing what it can. It's mobilized thousands of troops, and they were very much in evidence on the streets this afternoon, helping with the rescue, helping distribute aid. There have been many offers of help from around the world. A lot of help has already been arriving, and that help will be badly needed.
And Harry, from what you've witnessed, would you say that 12,000 dead was a conservative estimate?
Yes, I would. And the officials here make no secret of the fact that they expect that death toll to rise perhaps considerably. The thing is that no one knows how many people are missing. Hundreds, perhaps thousands were swept out to sea. Their bodies may never be recovered. Some may be washed ashore. So everyone here expects the death toll and the toll in human misery to rise considerably.
Harry Smith, thank you very much for joining us. Now, this tsunami had all the power of a nuclear explosion, and as we've seen, it brought death and destruction across a vast area. It even reached the coast of Somalia in East Africa, 3,000 miles from the epicenter. Hundreds of fishermen are feared dead there. Added to the 12,000 we know to have died in Sri Lanka, 7,000 were killed in India and islands off its coast. In Indonesia, up to 5,000 have lost their lives, but it's reported that figure could double. In Thailand, the figure is 866 dead. In Bangladesh and Myanmar and Malaysia, the destruction was largely to property, but 88 deaths have so far been reported. In all, the total stands at more than 25,000 people dead, and all the while, that figure is growing. Bill Neely now on the sheer scale of the destruction, and a warning here. His report includes disturbing images.
It looked like a perfect day, the sea blue and calm, tourists strolling on the sand, and then it changed. The first of the waves that swept thousands away.
Hey! Hey! Hey!
As the second wave rolls in, the first begins to swallow the town, street by street. The tourists trapped on balconies must decide to stay or jump into the debris that would kill so many. Further up the Malay coast, another resort is pounded. The tourist keeps filming until it's clear there's worse on the way. Each time the sea recedes, it seems over.
Coming again! Coming again! Big one. Bigger!
These tourists realise they now have to run for their lives.
Oh my God!
All this in Malaysia, which got off lightly with 60 dead. Elsewhere, it was carnage. It all began in Indonesia, and it turned the land to sea, striking at 7 in the morning as people slept. The death toll here doubled today, with 10,000 feared dead, and the known dead laid out in red. The stench and the sights hard to bear. One by one, the victims are gathered. So many sleeping children had no chance. Bodies litter the streets. Nothing like this has ever hit in modern times. And the panic continued today. The crowds fleeing the coast at every sign of a swelling sea. Yet at first they were slow to see the danger. After the first wave, thousands went back to look at the damage. Then the most deadly wall of water struck. The seabed had fallen, and 1,000 miles of water above was on the move. At 300 miles an hour, it has made islands where there were none. This is India, and here too, thousands are dead and thousands unaccounted for. The mourning is not only for the dead, because so many of these people have lost everything. Up to 1 million are homeless. And here too, it is the children who had the least chance. The men pull ashore bodies from the sea. Few of the women can swim. They fill the lists of the dead and the missing. Nearly 200 pilgrims were killed on one Indian beach where they'd gone for a ritual bath in the sea. The survivors are handled gently, but it's hard to treat them properly. In India's worst-hit areas, many medical centres have been destroyed. On the beaches today, they laid candles and prayed for hundreds of missing fishermen. They made a huge sculpture of the sand that choked so many here. On the Indian Ocean islands of the Maldives, the sea is in the streets and people move at their peril, because even now its speed and debris can be deadly. This is one of the world's most exclusive holiday destinations, but the millionaire's paradise was a hell for an hour, and one they'll never forget here. Across 8 countries they are counting their dead and their blessings. Among them, on an island off Thailand, our Asia correspondent John Irvine, who, with his wife and children, was injured when the waves slammed into their holiday resort.
It's been a day of glancing out to sea every 5 minutes or so. I'm afraid that's become habitual for everybody here. Such was the terror of yesterday. People are buoyant that they survived. They're counting their blessings. At other moments they are recollecting what happened yesterday and just how lucky we are to have survived.
This isn't Asia. It's nearly 4,000 miles away in East Africa, where the waves crashed ashore. This is Kenya. In Somalia, a dozen died. This was an awesome, appalling and extraordinary event. The power of nature against the flimsy will of man. There was only one winner and tens of thousands of losers. In 40 years, there's been nothing like this. The earthquake that caused this was more powerful than all the quakes of the past 5 years put together. 750 times more powerful than last year's quake in Iran that killed 30,000.
Get inside, come on guys.
This was devastating, deadly and deceptive, coming from beneath the sea, catching millions unawares, killing tens of thousands and leaving a vast swathe of the earth tonight in shock and in mourning.
We'll be all right for this one.
Bill Neely there. Now, 13 Britons are known to have been killed in the disaster. They were among thousands who had left behind a cold Christmas here in search of winter sun in Thailand. Let's go live now to our correspondent Adrian Britton, who's in Phuket this evening. Adrian.
Yes, well, Thailand hasn't experienced an earthquake which has caused such devastation since the year 1545. Now, Phuket is an exotic island of fun, beauty and tranquility, but tonight it's strewn with rubble and human shock. A mighty force rising out of the sea and crushing an idyllic resort. The tidal waves turn to torrents around the coastline of Phuket, lifting and toiling everything in their path. Crystal blue seas became muddy, destructive rivers. At night time, with their hotels now debris, they sought higher ground for safety, sleep and warmth. The mortuaries were unable to accommodate the colossal toll of death. Body after body was laid out in halls. Those who escaped, like this tourist from Oxford, had amazing tales of survival.
We all got out of the rooms, and then one of our friends has had to go to the hospital. We couldn't get out of the room. He woke up and was asleep on his bed, lying woke up in water. Had to throw the TV through the window to climb out.
When the morning sea struck, many became separated from relatives, but with immense relief were later reunited. For others, there were the memories of the desperate efforts of 9/11, with families bearing photographs of their lost ones, in hope they too would be found. At Phuket Airport this evening, holidaymakers sprawled across the departure hall waiting for the next flight home. Graham Mettle from Tunbridge Wells was wounded but walking with his daughter Charlotte. Their holiday cut short, he told me another incredible story of escape.
The room was full of 14 or 15 people. They were screaming as the water started coming up through the floor. We were outside on the balcony ready to jump somewhere, and it came closer and closer. I just said to Charlotte, get ready, because I thought these guys were going to burst out of the room and just land on us because they were panicking so much.
The hospitals are inundated with more serious injuries. Others are living in relief agency tents. Their homes were swept away in furious seconds, but they are thankful they have not lost more.
And Adrian, those images of people putting up pictures of their lost ones, as you called them, that must really bring home the tragedy.
Yeah, they are really heartbreaking scenes, are they? Posting those pictures up on the walls of any remaining buildings, hoping, like we saw after 9/11, that those photographs would be recognised and they would be found. But as we saw after 9/11, that hope was soon to fade. But there have been many stories of survival. One of them concerns somebody who I've known for quite a few years, an ITV news producer, Di Ridley, who was actually not too far away from here on honeymoon, and you were in the water at the time when that tidal wave struck. Tell me what happened, Di.
Yeah, that's right. Me and my husband, Jason, were out in the water swimming, enjoying the winter sun. And all of a sudden we heard shouts from the beach to come back in. We didn't know why, but we immediately returned to the beach. And as I turned, I did notice a wave on the horizon, but thought nothing of it and just returned to the beach. But when I did get back there, two things. First of all, I didn't know where Jay was. We got split up, and the other thing, as I turned, I noticed, I can only describe it really as a wall of water that spread across the whole bay approaching us.
Now, say, you're on honeymoon, you've just got married, and you're suddenly separated from Jay, your husband. That must have been terrifying.
Well, it was. I literally had no idea where he was. It later transpired he'd gone back into the water to save a little girl. But I then turned. I didn't know what to do, because the most terrifying thing about this water was it was bringing the debris with it. And when I say debris, I mean 25-foot wooden boats, chairs, sun loungers, tables from cafes. Everything was coming with this water towards me.
Di, it's absolutely fantastic to see you safe and well. Well, it's just after 3 o'clock in the morning here in Phuket, and when there's daybreak, well, then the awesome task begins again of trying to clear that devastation.
Adrian, thank you very much indeed. Now, perhaps most shocking of all, scientists across the region knew a devastating tsunami was on its way, but were forced to sit and wait, unable to warn anyone. Unlike the Pacific, the Indian Ocean has no tsunami alarm system. Our science editor, Lawrence McGinty, looks now at how thousands of lives could have been saved.
It's a dreadful reminder of the uncontrollable force of nature. The word tsunami means harbour wave. It sounds innocuous, but it isn't. The saving grace is that they usually happen in places where warning systems are in operation.
Well, there are warning systems around the Pacific protecting the coasts of America, for example, and Japan. But around the Indian Ocean, scientists have not been so aware of the risk or are less convinced about it. And as such, there has not been the government pressure to build an integrated warning system.
Tsunamis are relatively common here in the Pacific, averaging 8 a year over the last century. They're largely generated by underwater volcanoes and earthquakes. The reason you don't hear much about them is that there's a sophisticated warning system throughout the ocean. The main centres are in Alaska, Washington State, California, and here in Hawaii. And there are many others scattered throughout the ocean. Contrast that with the Indian Ocean. Tsunamis here are a lot less common. And that's why only last year governments bordering the ocean decided not to put an expensive warning system in place. Had it been operational, who knows how many of the thousands of people who died could have been saved.
I have absolutely no doubt that if there was an equivalent to the Pacific early warning system in place here, even though there are only a few hours warning, an hour or two warning, instead of several hours warning as we have in the Pacific, because it's much bigger, if one had been in place, then I think maybe a half or 2/3 of the lives lost would not have been lost.
The earthquake that triggered the tsunami was bigger than all the quakes in the last 5 years worldwide put together. But scientists watching these traces could only stand and stare.
As soon as somebody in an earthquake centre saw the seismometers recording an earthquake of that magnitude, they would have known there was a risk. But there's just no mechanism for them to pass that message through to national authorities and then to local authorities.
Scientists around the world knew a tsunami was coming. The tragedy is they had no alarm bell to ring. Lawrence McGinty, ITV News.
The island paradise that is the Maldives was not spared. At one stage, 2/3 of its capital was underwater, leading to fears that its fragile economy has been wrecked. Our correspondent Martin Geisler is the first foreign journalist to reach the islands, and he joins us live now. Martin.
Mark, it's a million miles from the tourist paradise this place is meant to be. A task force has been set up here in the Maldives to coordinate the relief work here. They're based in this school in the island's capital, Malé. They face an enormous task as well. These islands, and there are more than 1,000 of them, are spread across tens of thousands of square miles in the Indian Ocean. The infrastructure across vast swathes of this country has been wiped out. The people here can't even begin to estimate the cost of the damage.
Paradise shattered in a matter of minutes. The Maldives, without warning, overwhelmed by the sea. This place is enormously vulnerable. No part of the territory sits more than 8 feet above sea level. They have built defences here, but they were no match for nature's power this time. Seaplanes, normally chartered to ferry rich tourists around these atolls, are now being used for relief aid. We flew with one team to see the devastation for ourselves. This is Suniva Gili, one of the world's most exclusive resorts. Guests here stay in 5-star lodges on stilts in the ocean. Yesterday, they were hammered by a wall of water 3 meters high. Some still stand, but they're ruined. On a neighbouring island, another resort, flattened by the waves. The Maldives is a collection of 1,200 tiny islands. Almost all of them have been affected in some way by this, many wiped out completely. It'll be weeks before the people here get a real idea of how much damage has been done and the cost of repairs. Tourism is the country's lifeblood. That industry has certainly been damaged. This viewer's video shows the scene moments after the tsunami hit. At the island's main airport today, hundreds of British tourists waiting to leave. Some injured, many had been incredibly lucky.
The water just came up like a gigantic wave and took the water bungalow. It took all of the deck. The deck came flying in through the windows at us, and I said, let's get out of here.
Started off being able to stand up in it, and then cupboards and chairs and mattresses started coming at you. And I got out of the way and ended up on some sort of like pier going out to sea, and there was people on the beach in the early morning just being washed out.
We climbed up this tree while the water was still breaking right at our feet, the waves. We head up the tree and went higher and higher until we were right at the top, and we couldn't go any higher, and we just waited until the water level eventually dropped.
Most of the tourists are now heading home, leaving behind a shattered country where the repair work is only just beginning.
Well, I've just spoken to the chief government spokesperson here in the Maldives. The latest figures he has for this part of the world are as follows. 52 people confirmed dead at the moment. We understand among that number 2 British tourists. 66 people still unaccounted for, and up to 12,000 without homes. Mercifully, that death toll here not quite as devastating as in some places in this part of the world, but devastating enough for this tiny country, and equally devastating the economic impact. A number of the major hotels here say they won't be able to open for a number of months, and clearly that'll have an awful impact on a country which relies almost totally on the money tourists bring.
Martin Geisler, thank you. It's hard to grasp the tragedy of more than 25,000 people dead. The individual stories are perhaps easier to comprehend. Debbie Bateson was on holiday in Sri Lanka, perhaps the worst hit country of all. Earlier, we saw the pictures she filmed at the moment when the deadly waves smashed into her hotel. Shuli Ghosh met her when she arrived back in Britain.
An emotional return for Debbie Bateson, who witnessed the terrifying forces which turned her holiday hideaway into a disaster zone. Recovering from her ordeal at home today, she described to me how she'd filmed some of the devastation from her hotel on the southeast coast of Sri Lanka.
There was absolutely no warning that anything, untoward was going to happen. And then, as you can see from the top there are actually a few people being swept off from the beach.
Get inside, come on guys.
The force of the actual water and the speed of the water coming through, I've never seen anything like it. And there was something within my own gut feeling that just made me think this is terrifying, and I don't want to be here.
Debbie's escape was extraordinary. In the aftermath of the tsunami that hit Sri Lanka, over 10,000 people were left dead.
There was an awful lot of panic, and we could see the water coming up because of the structure of the hotel. It was cement, but fortunately it was quite open, so the water could flood through to the other side. And we realised it was coming up the stairwells, and so we just were praying that it would stop, and so fortunately it did.
How high is it going to go? Okay, I'm getting frightened now.
After a terrifying 12 hours trapped in the hotel, Debbie and others in her tour group were evacuated to Colombo. From there, they were flown home. She says she's lucky.
We were miraculously lucky. You know, some would say blessed, really. And, you know, we were bystanders, really, in this horror.
Debbie praised the staff at her hotel who guided holidaymakers to safety. For them and her, this was a dream holiday that turned into a nightmare. Shuli Ghosh, ITV News, Wokingham.
So tonight, at least 25,000 are dead, many more are injured. For millions of people along thousands of miles of coastline, the ocean that is their livelihood turned on them in an instant. Helpless people in defenceless communities swept so suddenly to their deaths. Homes lost, businesses destroyed, villages wiped out. Tranquil resorts turned into disaster zones. And caught up in it all, the tourists, witnessing at first hand the deadly and colossal force unleashed when the planet we inhabit breaks apart. Death came from the sea, said one Indian fisherman. What have we done to deserve this? And that's all from us for now. But in the last few minutes, it's been announced that the number of Britons killed has risen to 15. More on that on the ITV News channel. I'll be back here on ITV1 at 11:15. But for now, from me and from our teams in Asia, bye-bye.
Hey! Hey! Hey!
Mark Austin there with an ITV News special. That was a change of programme. Our advertised programme, Mr Bean, will now be shown at a later date.